Caribbean, of course, it matters. For people in the Caribbean, it matters not. It's always hot. So welcome. We've got a great lineup today. We're very fortunate to have Ken agree to speak at this meeting. We've had two of our executive members. We'll also make short presentations before Ken comes on. I should say to new people who first time at this meeting, CLS is not a funded organization. We depend on membership and donations. So if you haven't got a membership, please visit our website and see if you want to take out a membership. We have lots of activities for the rest of this year that will cost us a bit. So please be encouraged to join us and share if you can. Now, there's a couple of announcements I wanted to make before we got into the meetings. And one is the passing of Avis Hart. Avis was the wife of our honorary president, the late Dr. Richard Hart, who died about 10 years ago, a fantastic leader for CLS. Avis was always there supporting. I was managed to visit Avis in Bristol, where she lived a few months ago, and she was quite frail then. So, yes, sadly, goodbye to Avis. There's also been the passing of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the renowned novelist, Kenyan novelist, and activist who was imprisoned by the Kenyan government, a friend of Walter Rodney. I was fortunate to meet him a few times in London, as he was actually had a time at the library in Upper Street here in Islington. So, yeah, he was at age 87 and died about a week ago or so, around that time. We will put something on our website at some point about that. We also lost Duncan Campbell, who was a writer with the Guardian, another journalist who was always out there in the campaigns. We always bumped into him, could always depend on him to write something about the Caribbean. So not a great loss to the movement there. Yes, and I'm sure there's other fallen soldiers along the way too. It's been happening a lot lately. Okay, so without further ado, I'll ask Steve to do a presentation because on this meeting is focused on police killings, so I thought it made sense to us to have a little history and a background into the police. So Steve, will you take the floor?
Thank you. And looking at the colonial origins of policing, the earliest police forces were slave catchers, death squads exterminating indigenous nations, and labour enforcers of both enslaved and employed labour. By the end of the 18th century, when London had become the major port for the import of tropical produce from the Caribbean, mainly sugar and rum, London commodity traders were concerned about lack of security of the existing docks. So a group of businessmen raised the finance to demolish the old facilities and replace them with the West India Dock, surrounded by a wall to protect their cargoes. The West India Dock became the site of the first uniformed official police in Britain. Thus, river police were the forerunner of the Metropolitan Police. In 1812, Sir Robert Peel was appointed Chief Secretary of Ireland. The Peace Preservation Act 1814 laid the basis for the Royal Irish Constabulary, which played a central role in maintaining British rule over Ireland. Combining this colonial experience with the theoretical ideas of Patrick Colquhoun, that's the origin of the Metropolitan Police. Patrick Colquhoun spent his teens and early 20s in colonial Virginia, then served as agent for British cotton manufacturers and was the London agent of the slaveholders of St. Vincent, Nevis, Dominica and the Virgin Islands. He also owned shares in sugar and plantations in Jamaica. His main concern was in protecting bourgeois property relationships and disciplining the working class, who he saw as the enemy, but an enemy necessary for the production of wealth. Peel set out the main duties of the Metropolitan Police were to protect property, to maintain order, to quell riots, to put down strikes, and to produce a disciplined industrial workforce. Early colonial policing was shaped by slavery. Long before the London Metropolitan Police were formed, colonial cities in the slave colonies had paid full-time police forces derived from slave patrols. South Carolina, founded by slave owners from Barbados, set up its first slave patrol in 1702. Virginia followed in 1726, North Carolina in 1753. While most slave patrols operated in rural areas, urban patrols, like Charleston, South Carolina, City Guard and Watch, became a formal paid police force as early as 1783. These heavily armed police regularly inspected the passes of the enslaved and the papers of free black people. The only limit on police power was the fact that enslaved people were someone's property, so killing them could result in civil liability to the owner. The Barbados Slave Act of 1661 made it the legal duty of all white persons to watch, apprehend, and punish enslaved Africans, forming in effect a collective police force. A mounted and uniformed militia patrolled Barbados estates, performed twice monthly searches of the homes of the enslaved labourers, pursued runaways, and supervised gatherings of enslaved people at markets, funerals, and celebrations. These slave catchers were granted immunity by an Act for the Governing of Negroes, 1688. The United States also had its own domestic version of colonial policing, the Texas Rangers, who were trained to protect the interests of the white colonists when Texas seceded from Mexico in 1836, following the Mexican government's abolition of slavery. The Texas Rangers were a major force for white Anglo-Saxon Protestant colonial settler expansion, hunting down and killing the indigenous population, as well as violently driving out the Mexican inhabitants. In effect, they served as the front line in the ethnic cleansing of Texas, and having secured the land, they became labor enforcers for the landowners. One of their primary roles, of course, was to act as a slave-catching patrol, which led logically in the 20th century to their violent opposition to the civil rights movement. In the 1960s and 1970s, the Texas Rangers played a central role in suppressing the United Farm Workers of America, arresting and beating pickets and union officials. I would argue that the behaviour of the police today reflects these colonial origins. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. That was fantastic. Thank you. Okay, we'll go on to Paul. You want to come in, take the floor now?
Okay. Right. Can you see that okay? Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
I won't try
can
and do
see
it full screen because I'll lose everything. Okay, so let me try and be quick. I was hoping Jamaicans for Justice would be able to join us today because they're much more organised and up to date with information than I am. But let me see what I can manage. So my introduction is election year in Jamaica. The incumbent government is keen to show progress on reducing crime, especially murders, since it's a high priority concern. Along with jobs in the economy, it's their highest concern. But using unapologetic paramilitary policing, the murder rate has actually dropped recently by about 20%. But at the same time, the number of police killings has shot up in the last few months by 163%. So there's a rather a disproportion there. The human rights group Jamaicans for Justice has said this is unacceptable. But like Indicom, that's the body to investigate police killings, starting at least 5 years ago, Jamaicans for Justice is now being targeted as pro-criminal and anti-victim. It really is a current battle for hearts and minds, and the way a lot of news items on the television now are cast is very much that. Okay, let me see if I can get down to the next slide with any luck. Right, so here we go, the downward trend in murders. I won't read these right through, I'll try and be quick. So there has been a downward trend in murders this year, which the government, of course, is celebrating. The election has to be before September. Okay, so I said 20%, or this one's saying 35% drop in murders. You notice at the bottom that Prime Minister Holness said you have no hiding place. But also it goes on to say at the bottom, all the people who are importing guns into Jamaica, whether you live here or cooperate with people abroad, you have no hiding place. Now I've got a later slide mentioning that last year, Andrew Holness completed his PhD on the illegal importation of guns into Jamaica, but we've seen no results of that learning from him. Right, so here we go. JFK alarmed at 163% in police killings, and that was in February, and it's been much the same since February. The Security Minister, Dr. Horace Chang, dismissed concerns of extrajudicial killings. He reckons that the Jamaican police are intelligence-driven, they're not a hit squad. And as it says at the bottom, if we continue at this rate, we'll see over 250 citizens killed by the police this year. And by the way, it's often said, and it is true, that Jamaica has had the highest murder rate in the world in some years recently, but also we've had the highest rate of police killings in the world, and that is often left off. Some of these are repeat. Let me see why I put this one here. All right, a very interesting article in the newspaper. Are the killings justice or vengeance? Okay, the last sentence there, it looks like a slippery slope towards a police state. Whenever there's letters and articles in the paper, the comments underneath are very divided. Some people are very much for heavy-handed policing, and others, of course, just the opposite. This was just a little search I did on the local newspaper, and you can see the sort of things that are coming up. The one at the top I've just mentioned, cops kill 6. Apparently not so guilty, those 6. 2 brothers killed by police. JFK raises the alarm. Increase in killings is concerning, and so on. Right, now these 2 graphs, you won't be able to see what's written on them, but they're actually showing the murder rate in Jamaica. The top one in the last 20 odd years, in the bottom one since independence. And you can see at the bottom one that at independence 1962, there were very, very few murders, and it has climbed. And I think the red line is 1,000 per year. So it's been a steady climb, a few ups and downs, but it's a serious problem. Chang, the Horace Chang is our security minister, and back in 2022, and since then several times, maybe not quite in the same language, he's basically told the police shoot to kill when confronted by armed gunmen. I'm not sending any ambulance out there either, said Chang. The Prime Minister hasn't said it in quite such stark terms, but he's kind of echoed the same kind of thing. And as I said in the very first slide, it's an unapologetic approach to this heavy-handed paramilitary policing. This article is from 2014. So the idea of death squads within the police is no new thing. Very well established idea. I'm sure it continues. when I first got involved with CLS, it was following the Tivoli incursion, where the police killed 70 odd people officially, probably more like 200 unofficially, in search of Christopher Coke Dudus. But it was very heavy-handed. Since then, the idea of using state of emergency for regular policing became, between 2018 and 2023, became a regular feature. But they're actually just recently proved by the Supreme Court to be unconstitutional. They're supposed to be used in special circumstances where the state is under threat. What the current government did they can declare a state of emergency for, I think it's about 10 days or 2 weeks. Then they have to go back to the Parliament to get a renewal. Well, the opposition has actually been refusing the renewals. So what the current government was doing was actually saying, okay, that one's done, we'll start another one tomorrow. And so it went on for a long time. What was something of a pity was that alongside states of emergency, something was invented, if that's the word, called zones of special operation, which were like a state of emergency, but acknowledging that some social intervention was needed as well to try and reduce the cause of crime. Those things seem to have been forgotten about. So we were back to states of emergency. But recently, there's been a ruling that they were illegal, but the government does intend to appeal. This is the thing about the Prime Minister's PhD thesis. He makes it sound like when he writes, when I read this, that he was hoping to apply it to policy making, but I have not seen evidence of it yet. This is an article, a letter in the paper that was very, very powerful. But the first sentence there I've highlighted is an effort to normalize police killings. To some extent, it's been normalized in Jamaica, but there's even more effort, seems to be, at the moment. Indicom is a body set up in 2017, no, it could have been earlier, to investigate police killings. They probably have a new case nearly every day. But since they started, they haven't managed to convict too many people, partly because this heavy-handed policing turns off citizens who don't trust the police, and also giving evidence in court makes them a target. So it's very hard to convict people, which of course is what many people feel is behind the heavy-handed policing. You can't convict people in court, so you act as judge, jury, and executioner as an alternative. This is what I'm really referring to, that the new police commissioner on the left has been attacking Jamaicans for Justice, saying they're searching for relevance by making a big noise about police killings. And he says that Jamaicans for Justice should focus on the criminals, because without the criminals, we wouldn't be shooting anybody. But of course, one thing I've not included in this thing, that the government and the police commissioner seem to have the idea that there's a fixed number of criminals. If we get rid of them, everything will be fine. But of course, the social conditions in Jamaica mean that there's a new set of people turning to crime every day. Not sure why I put that slide up there. There must be something in it. All right. I think the last paragraph. To suggest that fatal shooting numbers can be reduced by anything other than the unwillingness of persons being apprehended to engage in deadly confrontation. If they don't challenge the police, then we won't shoot them. This article, I won't go through, but it's a worry that this government is not quite as bad as Trump, perhaps, but trying to ignore the rule of law. It comes up in the effort to move towards a republic, not exactly ignoring the rule of law, but not involving any openness for people to be involved. There was a recent demonstration by Jamaicans for Justice in support of less paramilitary type policing. And it was rather disappointing that not only the Prime Minister, but another Minister of Government on that day, on the day of the demonstration, decided he would wear blue in support of the police, clearly setting up the government and the police against Jamaicans for justice. And as I said at the very beginning, there's that kind of battle for hearts and minds now. So that was quite disappointing. I was at that demonstration. Same thing, a call to wear blue. Now, body cameras, Jamaicans for Justice, and many of us have been calling for body cameras. They've been on the agenda for about 10 years more, but still we hear excuses that the storage problems and technical problems. So never, not once in all these police killings has any body-worn camera by the police, any evidence being brought forward. But this is a heading, an article where somebody else's, a civilian's camera caught the police, and it was very clear that the killing was not necessary at all. Recently, Mario Dean was a young man arrested for a ganja spliff, finished up in prison, and he died because he was beaten up in prison. So there's another aspect. And in fact, the justice system in Jamaica is probably responsible for a lot of the police killings because it's so slow that the police cannot get convictions, and so they do the whole job themselves. And this is an article I wrote in the paper when JFJ would be being attacked. So I said they must defend their role in trying to support a more humane approach to policing. And the same sort of question keeps coming up. Do politicians really want to end police excesses? And many people feel they don't particularly. This was an article looking back at crime crisis that goes back 1974, the Gun Court, Suppression of Crimes Act. So things have been much the same for a long time. Murder rate climbing up, and the heavy-handed approach being used at times. This person was actually saying that when an effort is being made to ease off on the heavy-handed policing, crime is shot up. Not everybody agrees with that, of course. So this is, I think, the last slide. That should say 2016, I'm sorry, not 2026. So Amnesty did a report showing the same kind of thing. Show a culture of fear. So inner city folks, they kind of need the police when the gangs are fighting with each other, but at the same time, they get so abused by the police that very much mixed feelings. So there we go. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm sure people will have lots of questions at the end of the other presentation.
What I'll do,
Of course,
I'll try and tidy it up so it can be posted on the CLS website the next few days. Okay.
Okay, that's great. Okay, we'll move on to the next speaker. But before I do, I guess I should point out that police killings is rampant throughout the Caribbean, in Trinidad, Guyana, Barbados, even other countries, that police killings is something that's happening on a fairly regular basis. Okay, I'll introduce our next speaker, Ken Fero, who is a renowned multi-award winning filmmaker, activist and educator with Migrant Media, which has produced hard-hitting television and cinema documentaries examining radical community responses to issues of race, class, and resistance for over 30 years, including Injustice and Ultraviolence. He co-founded the United Families and Friends campaign, is a professor in media and communications at Regent University, London, and is joint convener for the People's Tribunal on Police Killings. And with that, I'll ask you, Ken, to please take the floor. It was a real pleasure working with you on the tribunal recently. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Luke, and thanks to the other speakers. It's refreshing to hear people using the term police killings rather than deaths in custody, which is the soft language that the state wants to use. I'll get to that a bit later. I'm going to fly through a presentation and then talk a little bit about the People's Tribunal. If I can just share the screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
1 second, sorry. Well, I can just start with. I'm going to start from the beginning, but I can't. Here we go. Okay. So as Luke said, I come from a background of film, using film as a tool of resistance to look at human rights abuses, particularly in the UK. We've been set up since 1989. Migrant Media is a collective of people from Middle East, Africa, Caribbean, and Asia as well. And we organize collectively as a workshop inspired by Marxism. For us, the issue around means of production and distribution when we first started was something we couldn't control. But of course, now everybody has a camera, so everybody has the means of production, and the internet and social media has allowed us to have the means of distribution. The first film that we made was actually around 30-year history of self-defense to racism in the UK. So looking at the movements that grew from the 60s with the Institute of Race Relations, with Frank Critchlow, with Linton, and all the people that all of you, I'm sure, know very well. And we wanted to do something that focused not just on the victims, but on the fight back, because we all know that for every killing and for every injustice, there are people who are trying to resist it. So that's where we come from this position of resistance. And I'll put the link to our films in the chat afterwards in case people want to see them. We then continue to do films basically around Europe, looking at how immigrant refugee communities were organizing to fight racism and to fight for their rights. We also did our first film, and I'll just jump on from that, called After the Storm for the BBC, because one of the issues that we have in the UK is that the narrative about police killings and injustice is very heavily controlled by the BBC, by Channel 4, by all the broadcasters. And we were trying to get the voices of the people onto television, which was very, very difficult. But we finally managed to get a commission from BBC, which was around the settled Arab community in Britain, which people didn't know very much about, because for them, the idea of Arabs was, you know, the Gulf states and Saudis coming over to live in Knightsbridge, and also the other side was the absolute racism towards countries like Libya, Gaddafi, and that kind of thing. So we made this film for the BBC, which became an anti-war film made during the 1991 invasion by Britain and the United States of Iraq. We interviewed Dr. Rada Karmi, a Palestinian activist, who mentioned that 200,000 Iraqis had been killed during the war, and nobody seemed to care very much about it. The official BBC figure was 10,000 dead. So we put our figure in the film, and the BBC got back to us and they said, we're not going to show this unless you edit that statement out. But what they hadn't realized is that the figure of 200,000 was actually from the Pentagon, which we claim to be a reliable source. That's debatable, of course, whether the Pentagon is a reliable source, but we had that information. The BBC responded to us by saying, we're going to show your film because you have the evidence, but you will never, ever make a film for the BBC again. And that was in 1992, and that's what's happened since then. So our voice has very much been marginalized in terms of trying to tell stories, but we continued anyway. making films for Channel 4, which was a lot more radical in those days, looking at issues of asylum seekers, detention during deportation, death during deportation. And during that time, this was 1993, 1994, there was the murder of Joy Gardner, who I'm sure many of you know about. Joy Gardner was murdered in 1993 in her house in North London. She was shackled, she was gagged with 13 feet of tape in front of her 5-year-old son, Graham, and she died. There was a trial of that, of the 3 police officers and immigration officer at the Old Bailey for manslaughter. The police were found not guilty. And because of that film, which was called Justice Denied, when we put out that film, the narrative about the police in the UK is, you know, the police are there to help you. It's the Bobby on the beat, the funny hats. And this is the image of the police that the state wants to project to the world, because there is financial benefit for them for doing that. Apart from the control of the population, the police is something which is monetized. So the Met, for example, have huge contracts to do training across the world. So there's a financial incentive for them to project the police in the UK as professional and not violent. Because of that film, Justice Denied, again, there were lots of complaints by the public. We were threatened by members of the public. These are just some of, you probably won't be able to read some of these, but these are some of the comments from members of the public. There's one particular one here, very one-sided. This woman was illegal immigrant. You obviously are a left-wing station, and I hope you get burgled or raped on the way home tonight. So this is the kind of response that we got because of the film. And the reason we got this response is because Joy Gardner was portrayed as violent. She was big, she was strong, she was able to throw the police off her. All lies, of course, and all based on the history of racism that is so embedded in this country and in the people of this country as well. Nevertheless, we decided that this was something we should look into. So we tried, these are letters of rejection from Channel 4 for a number of years, where they were saying that basically the issue of what they called them deaths in custody wasn't that important. It was minimal. There wasn't anything to report on. So we made this film called Injustice, which was not funded by television. It was funded by crowdfunding and by basically us working for 7 years unpaid to tell the story of the families. What we discovered after Joy Gardner was that we started looking into other cases, and we went back to David Olawale in 1969, which is the first recorded case, but in fact there are other cases that haven't been revealed so far that we've discovered recently, all the way through the cases in the 80s and Cynthia Jarrett, Cherry Gross, all the names that many of you are familiar with. And we realized that the families had been quite isolated. There were support mechanisms and there were activists and activist groups, whether it was Socialist Workers' Party or the Nation of Islam or any of the other monitoring groups that were around at the time. They were there to support individual families, but nobody was putting the families together. So through the making of the film, we decided to create the United Families and Friends campaign, so that the families, particularly the mothers, because it was the women that were usually leading the family campaigns, could come together, could talk, and could construct their own organization. So United Families and Friends, which began in 1996, involved the families of Joy Gardner, the families of Brian Douglas, who was killed in Clapham, the families of Ibrahim Essay, who was killed in East London, of Christopher Alder. I could go on and on. And when these families came together, they became a very, very powerful force. They were able to attack the state. And what they were asking for was not for the state to implement law, but for the state to go further than that.
Now, I'll be back in a couple of minutes with an up.
We ended up on the BBC because when we went to show the film at the Metro Cinema in central London. This would have been in 2001, which was when the film was released. We decided to invite the ambassadors and the cultural attaches of every country that Britain had accused of human rights abuses. So we had people from Cuba, from China, from Iran, and from many other countries in the audience. We had the families in the audience, some journalists and some activists. And the Police Federation, which is the trade union for the police officers, decided to threaten the cinema with libel. And the cinema pulled the film. And from that point on, there became just a battle between us and the Metropolitan Police Federation to show the film. The police were accusing us of libel because none of these cases had actually gone to trial. And the very few that had, the police had been found not guilty. So the police were arguing, you can't call us murderers because we haven't been convicted of being murderers. And they also accused us of incitement to riot. So we were being threatened by these charges. Our position, which was that the right to life is more important than the law of libel. So morally, we put that argument to people, and we had a huge amount of support from the general public. There must have been 20 or 30 screenings booked in cinemas all over the UK, in every single city, and every single time the Police Federation threatened the cinema and the cinema pulled it. What happened on that very evening, in whichever city it was, somebody in the audience would get up and say, I run a community center, we run a squat, we run a pub, I have a big house, and the audience would then be taken to that location and the film would be shown there. So the police very soon got the message that we wouldn't be silenced. One of the major things we did in the film is that we actually counted the number of dead that hadn't been killed from 69 to 99, which was a 30-year period. And during that period, we counted 1,000 people that had been killed by the police in the UK. Nobody before us making that film, which went out in 2001, had actually counted the number of dead. No organization, no media organization. And for us, that was a very important fact to put out there. And that very fact of 1,000 was shocking to people because everybody was hearing about these cases in isolation. And then because of the inquest system and because the way the state and the media collude to make these cases disappear basically and to cut the support of the people, this was something which nobody had envisaged. It was this number. And so 1,000 was working out at about 1 per week. So one person per week was being killed by the police or dying in custody or whatever term you want to use. So that figure of 1,000 became established after the film went out. Eventually, after, well, a week after the band screening at the Metro Cinema, which was the first screening, we decided to hire a hall, and the hall owners decided they would shut the film down. The audience decided to take over the hall, which was in Red Lion Square. I can't remember the name of it, but it's supposed to be a center of free speech. They were so proud it was a center of a free speech. They said they even let the National Front speak there, which, you know, is just another debate. But they let the National Front speak there, but they wouldn't let us show the film. The audience wasn't having any of that. They threw out the cinema owners, barricaded the doors. The police tried to come in, and we ended up on the front page of the Metro newspaper and on BBC that night. So this battle anyway went on between us and the police for about 6 months. We were having secret screenings. I remember one in Haringey. We had the West Indian Cultural Centre booked out. We had to ask people to come to Turnpike Lane tube station to have a secret screening. So this is in the UK, a place where you're supposed to have freedom of speech, a place where you're supposed to be able to express yourself without fear of persecution, and that's what the police were trying to do. So secret screenings, and finally a challenge on the police that we made. We were asked by the Police Federation to show injustice to the police officers that we had accused of murder in the film. We had 20 or 30 police officers in the basement of the Police Federation offices. we showed them the film and we told them that if they didn't stop harassing the cinemas, that we would take them to court for loss of earnings because they were stopping us showing the film. Because we threatened to take them to court for loss of earnings, they realized that if we got them into court for those charges, that the first question we'd be asking them is, why can't we say that? What did you do to Brian Douglas? What did you do to Joy Gardner? And so on and so on. And after that, we never heard from the police again. So it makes you wonder why all these police officers who claim to be innocent, who were accused of being murderers, who were, from their point of view, slandered and libeled in the film, did not take out any action against us. So this is just some more slides of some of the outcomes of the film. Eventually, we did get to show the film at the Sheffield Documentary Film Festival, but before that we had lots of international screenings. So Injustice was shown across the Caribbean. I remember in May 2002, on the anniversary of the killing of Brian Douglas, we showed it in Maypen, which is where his family were from, and had a very interesting screening there talking about the correlation and the relation between police killings in Jamaica and police killings in the UK. So we were making lots of international links. And we just basically went on and on. We went to Iran, we were invited there by the government. So we became the enemies of the Attorney General and the friends of the Iranian regime, which was a very strange place to be in. So the impact of Injustice was that the investigating system, which was at the time called the PCA, the Police Complaints Authority, was then changed to the Independent Police Complaints Commission, which is basically the police investigating themselves. It's now called the IOPC. So they change their name every 2 decades, but of course, their function is the same. It's to make excuses for the police and to give excuses to people about why police officers have got a license to kill. We went to Channel 4 to show Injustice and they refused. And so we took the film and we projected it on the side of Channel 4, on the side of the building at night. So the film was shown on Channel 4, but not in the usual way. So we're constantly trying to provoke the government and also the media, who from our point of view are the gatekeepers of the government, to show the film. BBC refused to show it, and the film has been shown thousands and thousands of times. It's had broadcasts across the world, but it will never ever be shown in British television. And bringing us up to the present day, after George Floyd was murdered, we went to Channel 4 and we said, look, we have this film, we wanted you to show it in 2001, but you refused. Times are different now, awareness is different, particularly around young people who are concerned not just about George Floyd, but about the killings in the UK. And the commissioning editor for documentaries was very keen on showing the film. He said, leave it with me. A week later, he got back in touch and he said, I've gone to the executive of Channel 4, and they have said that they don't feel it's appropriate to show your film. While the filmmaking was going on, we were continuing to make other films with other families, like the family of Sean Rigg, the family of Jason McPherson, the families of Cynthia Jarrah and Roger Sylvester, Mark Duggan. So we have a lot of films made with families. When we make films, we're using it as a political tool and as a weapon for the families and for the people. At the same time, we were organizing to try to push the issue of police killings more central on the agenda. So I'll just come out of this now. And I think this is where we came to having the idea for the People's Tribunal on Police Killings. One of the main issues was that the dialogue and the language around police killings is very liberal. Many of the organizations who work in this area are NGOs and rely on charity funding. So they are limited by what they can say. They can't call these what they are, and that's a major problem. So one of the key things we tried to do in the People's Tribunal was to reframe the narrative on police killing. So we talked about torture, we talked about terror, we talked about cover-up, we talked about the language of collusion, and there was one other theme I can't remember. I'll put the report into the chat when I've finished so people can read it. And it was a 2-day hearing for 30 families with expert witnesses speaking, like Luke. We had Gus John, we had Gargi Bhattacharya, we had a couple of other speakers, people from Northern Ireland, to make the link between colonial policing and the British state. We had people from Brazil to talk about killings in Brazil, particularly by paramilitary groups, because we felt that paramilitary groups were active within the Met in terms of, you think about Mark Duggan and more recent cases. And also we had people from Palestine because of the history of, obviously, of Britain in Palestine and policing in Palestine as well. And the end result of the People's Tribunal on Police Killings is that there is now an organization which is led by the families, with a group of volunteers who for 2 years built the People's Tribunal on Police Killings. We have 3 further tribunals we will be doing on prison killings, on immigration killings, and on secure medical units over the next 10 years. In terms of police killings, we are taking 3 actions. One, we are producing an evidence document, which was basically what was presented at the 2-day tribunal, to accuse the British state of crimes against humanity. And the families will be naming all the police officers, their senior police officers, the police investigation system, the Crown Prosecution Service, the Home Secretary, and the Prime Minister of the time, from 1968 to the current day, for crimes against humanity. That's the first action. The second action is that within the UK, class actions using domestic law are not really used as much as they are in the UK, in the United States, for example. And so we are going to be taking actions, civil actions and class actions against police officers in all these killings. So that's domestic law. And finally, the response to the People's Tribunal internationally has been absolutely fantastic. We've had people coming forward from Australia, from Canada, from France, from other countries, who are all now organizing their own tribunals, because as you know, colonial law, colonial policing, and colonial judiciary as well, which is linked to colonial policing, exists still in Australia, exists still in Canada, and in other countries as well. So that is building to an international movement to take all these countries to the United Nations General Assembly at some stage in the future. And particularly in the United States as well. We have a lot of very powerful activists in the United States who are co-organizing a People's Tribunal on policing and prison incarceration, with people like Joy James and others as well. And I guess, yeah, going back to Injustice and to where we are now in terms of use of language, when we made Injustice, we said these are human rights abuses. And the state was not happy, because at that stage, you couldn't talk about human rights abuses. But we were aware of Malcolm going to the United Nations and saying, look, how can you talk about civil rights when we don't even have our human rights? So that's where we're coming from, and that's where we're going. And we would very much like anyone who wants to be involved and to support us to join us. And I think I'll just open it out now. I don't know how long I took. I'm sorry if I went on.
Thank you very much, Ken. I'm sure people will want to applaud that presentation. We've raised so many issues. I'm sure there's lots of questions bubbling away, but I'll take first shot at it. The question is, how can you support organizations in the Caribbean in taking a similar approach? You know, what support can you provide it? But before you reply, I just wanted to say it was a real pleasure and honor to be on the tribunal. You asked me to be there as an expert witness on trauma, and you know, and that was mainly because of the work I'd done with violent men as a counselor. And I listened to stories from the victims, you know, the people who lost loved ones over 2 days. And, you know, I must say it was very traumatic. I listened to lots of bad stories, but these were some real tough stories. Listening, you couldn't believe the police attitude and behavior towards, you know, people who had lost a loved one, who had been killed by the police in a cell or in the streets or wherever it is they've done it. And that's really stuck with me. And it's right that you say, you know, you're trying to change the language. It's not that in custody. We've learned our lesson very much so in terms of the fight for reparations. We've changed the narrative, and most people now get it that we don't talk about slavery as such, but the enslaved. You know, people were forced into a situation. They weren't born into slavery. They were enslaved, and that's beginning to make a shift, I think, in people's perception about, you know, the whole question around reparations. So I think that's very important that you continue to do that. And of course, the British police have is a brand name. You know, when I came to this country 40 years ago or more, and I lost my wallet and wanted help to get home, didn't know how to get about the place. I thought, all right, I'll get a lift from the police or, you know, flag down the police. You know, that's how naive I was coming from the UK, from Guyana, you know, because we had this image of British being this place of justice and good bobbies and friendly bobbies and so on. They would help you out if you're in a bit of bother. Not so. They just pointed me in the rough direction which I should be traveling, and they wasn't gonna give me a lift in any car, I'm afraid. Okay, I'll open up the floor now. Please, you might want to respond to my question, which is about how can this work that you've been doing, which is amazing work, be supported in some way in the Caribbean?
I think, you know, you could have a tribunal on police killings in the Caribbean, but every place has its own specific politics. The key thing for the People's Tribunal is that it's led by the families. That's the most important thing, that the families have to be central, because actually the families are quite revolutionary in what they're asking for. They are not asking simply for individual officers to be prosecuted successfully. And we have to ask ourselves as a movement, why is it that there's this focus on the inquest system, which has been a complete and utter diversion from criminal trials? For the past 50 years, there's been a kind of deflection using the inquest system as a way of pretending there's been some kind of state investigation. But out of the 3,000 cases that we've had since 1969, that's the figure. 3,000 people have been killed in this country by the police since 1969. Out of those 3,000, not one single case has been successfully prosecuted after an inquest. So if as a movement, if we don't ask ourselves these basic questions, where are we going to be in another 50 years' time? Another 3,000 and still no justice? So I think the position we're taking is to attack the state and not to negotiate with them. It's the basic thing about reform and revolution. We're not reformists. If people want to continue to ask the police to reform, they want to continue the police to have training and all these deflective things, they can do that. But the families have an obstinate memory. They're not going to give up. It's pointless telling families, well, you can get involved with this because then, you know, this could decrease the number of killings. I mean, that's not something that families are not interested in, but they want to know what's going to happen to the people that killed Joy, the people that killed Winston, the people that killed David. all these people who are still serving police officers. And if you can find people who committed crimes against humanity in Nazi Germany in 1945 and take them to the European Court of Justice and prosecute them, then we can sure as hell find the officers who are walking the streets of Britain who have done these killings in our lifetimes. So, sorry, Luke, I went off track a bit, but I think it's that kind of spirit of resistance that we need that we all have, that we need to kind of join together and to support each other in these different struggles. Actually, it's hard work. You have to give up a lot. It takes time, but the absolute love, strength, and determination of the families will keep you going forever.
Great. Thank you very much, Ken. And I certainly felt that that weekend that I had with the families. They're pretty amazing people who continue to fight for justice. We've got a couple of questions. What I'll do now, I'll take 2 questions. If people can raise their hand in the chat, that way I'll know who's lined up. But I've got one in the chat. Yes, Satish, your hand was up first, so I'll ask you to unmute and put your question, and after that, Joseph Antoine, you'll do the next. You'll put your question to Ken. Satish, you can take the floor with your question.
It looks like he's frozen to me.
Not frozen. Okay, we'll move to Joseph then until Satish can get unfrozen. Joseph, you want to put your question? Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ken, and a very well presented presentation. I want to ask the question around the role of the police, because it seems as though, and the origin of the police, because it seems as though there's a confusion of the origin of the police, the role and function of the police. Some people think that the police are from heaven. But can you tell us the police origin, especially maybe the Caribbean with slavery? And finally, one of the things I think that is being done on us is that create a condition that we feel insecure. So we are looking in the wrong direction. and also that people want peace, but they don't want justice, because justice is very, I would say, expensive, and they don't want to pay the price of make sure that justice is secure. I'm one of those people who recently lost someone to police killing in Grenada.
Sorry to hear, Joseph. Okay, we'll put that question to. We've got Frank Murray. Can you come in with a question? So you can take Joseph and then Frank.
Yeah,
Frank,
I will do.
you want to take the
Satish
floor?
is back and he's waving his hand frantically. So should you take Satish? He's back.
I don't see his hand. Sorry. Come back, Joseph, if you weren't finished.
No, yeah, I'm basically finished. Oh, sorry.
Good. Could you lower your hands and
finish, Joseph. Finish what you're saying, Joseph, and then we'll have Satish. Sorry, I just saw the hand wave.
Yeah, I will welcome. We having some of the same process in the Caribbean, and I agree with Ken that all the islands or the countries they have their own political, uniqueness. So maybe it needs to be done from an island point of view, or probably regional, like maybe the OECS or something like that. So, but we need to bring that in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
For accountability.
Okay, thanks, Joseph.
Shall I answer that?
Satish,
shall I just answer that quickly on a practical level first?
Yeah, please.
I think I don't have any faith in the United Nations or the ICC or any of these organizations. But the point is, we have to use them to attack the states, because once you use these organizations, can you imagine after the people of being told that actually 3,000 families is taking the United Kingdom governments to the ICC for crimes against humanity. That in itself is a victory, because it politicizes everybody. You know, the problem is that people don't know about this, or they do know and they don't want to know that they know. So we have to deal with that. That's going on. The answer to the question, to Joseph's question, is that, you know, a people's tribunal is basically people getting together, the victims talking about their pain, but also talking about resistance and how they can fight together. And a tribunal can be a day or 2 days or 2 hours, it doesn't matter. But if every single country in the Caribbean did something like this, and then we move to United Nations as a force, as a movement, as a body, with every single country coming together, and we have 2 or 3 families from each country, one after another, that will be a powerful force. I mean, we're talking about a movement, and a movement can only happen from the grassroots up. But I think the families are already talking to each other. And I just have to say that, of course, the liberal organizations for us are just as dangerous as and part of the state. The way they control families, the way they tell families they shouldn't speak out until the trial happens. And by the time the trial doesn't happen, it's too late because people have moved on. The language that's used, the fact they sit down and get very small gains and celebrate, big problem. But I think in terms of organizing across internationally, from an anti-colonial and anti-imperialist perspective, we need something that gives people hope. We need hope. And we have to be aware that young people today, whether they're out on the streets about BLM or Me Too or the environment, they've had enough. And it's our role as people who've been in the movement for quite a while to give them some hope and to say, this is something you can do. Anyway, sorry, another big speech. I'll have to stop that. I apologize.
Satish, thanks very much, Ken. Satish, you want to come in a question?
Yes, please. First of all, I'd like to point out, I'm doing some research for books. I've written a couple of them. And the latest one is on historic injustices from the 1830s. And what happened with them is that this was a period where the British working class were demanding their rights. And even before the era of policing, what you found was law enforcement was allowed to routinely kill people without any consequences. For example, the Merthyr Rising in 1831 lost over 20 people to law enforcement violence. And the end result was their response to this and the criminal justice system was that it prosecuted the protesters. It resulted in the execution of a man who was clearly innocent by the name of Richard Lewis or Dick Penderyn. So you basically see, even before policing, this is well over a century before we've been talking about, that they would basically kill people with impunity and then prosecute people for having the cheek to survive their attacks. That wasn't just an isolated incident. So essentially, what I wanted to do was link this thing up, which is essentially, it's not just a question of police or law enforcement violence against ordinary people. It is criminalization of ordinary people for surviving it and for having the audacity, as they would see it, to protest. So what I wanted to do was ask Ken and others, do you think we can have a discussion that looks at the whole issue of police and criminal justice system accountability and what should be the activity over that, because it's simply not working. All the methods that we've tried don't work. What do you suggest that we do to basically get an accountable system in some way or another?
Thanks for your question, Satish. We'll take one from Frank Murray now, and Ken, then you can deal with those two. Frank, you want to take the floor?
Yes. Thanks for that, Ken. I've met Ken already. I've met him several times actually, but he wouldn't remember. I got involved with friends. He got involved with. I got involved with United Friends and Family when we, as the RMT, invited Janet Alders to speak to at my branch actually, and this was a particularly horrid case. Ken shows how the authority gang together to protect this thing from getting public. But then there's a family, and the determination of the family has, they have to be determined because the whole system gangs up against them. Because Janet Alders, her brother Christopher, was killed in very unfortunate circumstances, and the whole system came down against them. So much so that 13 years after Christopher was killed, they found that the police had given them the wrong body to bury. They had buried an old woman, and then they had to, 13 years after, when the family of this old woman discovered where she was, at which mortuary she was, and that was the same mortuary that Christopher Alders was at. When they opened the casket, they found it was Christopher's body, and they had actually given the family the body of Grace Kamara was her name, to bury instead of Christopher. Then another case should have started up there, but again, they couldn't find the people who was working at the mortuary, etc., etc. And we also found that Janet's phone and thing was being tapped, and the police was listening on a conversation. That's 13 years later, and it was still going on. So one good thing came out of this anyway. Janet Alders now become, from a timid young woman, she has now become a driving force in this thing. She is a very, very powerful woman now, you see. But the family itself has to be very determined because the whole system comes down on you. Thanks. Pass it over.
Thank you, Frank. You want to respond to anything there, Ken, from the two?
Yeah, I better before I forget. Frank, I remember you. You wear a cap, right? A flat cap.
Yes, I do.
There you go.
If I'm not wearing my flamboyant hat.
So yeah, Janet is very determined, but of course all 3,000 families are very determined. Only a few of them are known about. We have to reach the people who are on their own, who have had no support, who haven't had the media cameras on them, who haven't had the support of the NGOs, and get all of them together. I think that's the key thing. Janet was part of the tribunal, and Luke would have remembered her from the tribunal and probably from before as well. So I think it is about all the families coming together and exposing all the horrors, because the horror that Janet faced has been shared by many, many other people. People just don't know about it yet. People think they know about this issue of deaths in custody, but they really don't. They haven't really looked into it enough depth. And what we're hoping is that through the 3 actions I mentioned earlier, we'll do that. In answer to Satish, I think there is a link. And okay, so why are we doing these actions if we don't actually have faith in international organizations, particularly international organizations that have been exposed to be totally ineffectual? If you look at the issue of Palestine, I mean, we have slaughter and genocide, and these organizations are doing very little about it. The reason we're doing that is, as I said before, is that we have to reach the people. But essentially, the solution to policing is not police reform, but police abolition. And if you're going to abolish the police, then you're going to have to abolish the judiciary as well. And if you're going to abolish the judiciary, you may as well abolish the government. So that's our position.
Okay, thank you. We got another question. Stephen, you want to take the floor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Very interesting report. The last statement you made raises a lot of concerns in my mind. But since part of this, the title of this forum is Solidarity, what kind of outreach are you doing to different communities? Because just to give you a little idea as to why I'm asking the question, is back in, say, 2013, for example, here in the US, 291 Black people have been killed versus 430 whites. In 2015, Blacks in America, 305 were killed by police versus 543. The highest rates of killing by police in America was 322 Blacks, 572 whites. News items basically focus on the killing of Black people, and I'm not including people who would be considered brown, Hispanics, Latinos, Latinx, Native Americans, or folks who they haven't really identified their identities for whatever reason. What kind of solidarity is being built by other communities so that this will be seen as a national issue as opposed to being defined as, I'm not saying that your organization is doing this, as opposed to just it being about Black people or people of color? What kind of solidarity is being built to address this as a national issue? Thank you.
Okay, Ken, you want to take it?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, we're doing that already. I mean, the tribunal included white families, and that has to be done. And when I talk about 3,000 people being killed, that's not just Black people, that's white people as well. I think it's important that we recognize the disproportionality of Black deaths, because out of the 3,000 cases in the UK that we've got, around 300 are Black. So that's 10%, whereas the Black population is 3 to 4%. So you've got twice as much chance of being killed by the police if you're Black than if you're white. And that's backed up by the figures. But of course, when we're dealing with policing, we deal with race, we have to deal with class as well. And so we're doing that as well. So what you've said, Frank, we're very much aware of. But I think the important thing we have to think about is this, is that the families who are resisting are the Black families. And the reason they're resisting is because if you've had to fight for your job, your hospitals, your education, more than white people, then it's natural that you will fight for the right to life, for your human right. So whilst the disproportionality because of pure racism is to do with the racism within the police, we have to, and we are taking class into account, because we want the Black families to be leading a movement for the whole of the United Kingdom, and that's the way it should be.
Great. Thanks, Ken. We'll have Glenn Roy up next in a minute. Glenn Roy, I just wanted to remind people as well that it's not only about the killings, it's about also the way the police behavior towards citizens. Some of you might have seen the news with a 92-year-old man in a care home who was brandishing a butter knife. I should say a disabled man in a wheelchair brandishing a butter knife, and his staff got worried and called in the police, who came, and within a minute and a half tasered him, pepper sprayed him, and all sorts. I think he's died since. I'm not saying as a result of the treatment, very poor chap. And just recently as well, a policeman was sacked for mishandling a youth, choking him by the neck, among other things and so on. So a 15-year-old. Okay, Glenroy, you want to come in with your question? How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Greetings,
Good.
Ken. Greetings, Luke, and the house. I'm sorry, Ken. I had a little chuckle when you said Setish was frozen. I thought, hell, it must be very cold in England this time of year. But I just wondered, Ken. You know, one of the nasty aspect of the way the state deal with the grievance on grieving of family, as you know, was to send in undercover agents into people's campaign.
Yeah.
And we know that if the police are there, so is Secret Service. So they don't tell us about the Secret Service. They throw us a piece of raw meat about the police and some of the horrible things that they were doing, getting people pregnant, etc. However, I just wondered if anybody anywhere can dig deeper into the people who were spying on family, some disgraceful thing. And on the issue of the wider community, I think it should be remembered. For example, one of my horror story I remember was an elderly, I'm not sure he was that elderly, but an Irish comrade leaving a pub with a broken chair leg, and somebody phoning the police and say, oh, he's got a sawn-off shotgun. And of course, the police shot him.
Harry Stanley.
Yeah. And it was an incredible dishonesty. But I just want to say, finally, one of the things that we've learned, I think, in the struggle, or when the miners' dispute were on, and we had been complaining for years about mistreatment by the police, it was a wake-up call for the white community that those same police officer was behaving so disgracefully towards white community. So your point about it's wider than just the police, it's the judicial, it's the state apparatus, is one that I hope will become more focused. Because one of the thing that came, or one of the things that was put on the table during the George Floyd, and we must remember the 25th of May, just gone, was the anniversary, 5-year anniversary of George's killing, is that the police should be defunded. Now, to most people, it means reducing their resource, but the whole thing is rotten to a core. And therefore, reform won't do. It's putting a Band-Aid on a blustering wound. So people should start talking about how we're going to end this situation, because more people are going to die. Every year, we don't get a decrease in the number of people that are grieving at the Family and Friends March. So just wondered if you touch on any other aspect of the police intervention or the police spying on family. Thank you.
Well, there is, at the moment, there is a judicial inquiry into undercover policing, which some of you may know about, which is very extensive, which goes into the undercover policing during the anti-nuclear movement in the 60s, all the way through the 70s, the 80s, through police killings, and the environmental movement, the women's movements. I mean, everybody was a target of the state, and everybody is still a target of the state. And I'm sure they'll be listening to our conversation to get some insight into what they can do, which is why I've put the link for our email on the chat in case people want to have an offline conversation. We can do that, particularly around organizing, because one of the things I like to do, apart from obviously talking too much, is to actually do things and to organize. So, and I think we need to link up again, Glenroy. We've had a bit of a lull in our communications, and we need to talk about the People's Tribunal, because I know you know a bit about the history of the UFFC, and there are things to be said about that. But I think, you know, one of the problems is that even when the police are uncovered, and very often, as was the case of Stephen Lawrence, it's actually in the interest of the Labour Party to do these kind of things. It was the interest of the Labour Party. They didn't care about Stephen, like they didn't care about Roland Adams or Ruhud Dagal or the hundreds and hundreds of other particularly young Asian kids that were called, but they called that because it was in their interest to co-opt the police monitoring movement into the Labour Party project. And again, judicial inquiries have never delivered anything. When have we had a judicial inquiry that has delivered what the families want? It may deliver some great new documentation, and the judges, you know, will get peerages, and the barristers will do thank you very much, do very well. But actually, for the people who have been fighting and resisting, inquiries are just used to suppress. And I think that, unfortunately, that's what's going to happen with the police undercover inquiry that's going on at the moment. Janet was spied on, the Sylvesters was spied on, every single family that was active during that period was spied on. And the reason they were spied on is because they were effective. The reason they were spied on is because they were united. The reason they were spied on is because the state saw them as a threat, you know, and when we organize like this, for me, it's a victory that they're having this inquiry, because it shows how effective the families were. Of course, we don't hold out any hope for any justice from these inquiries, which is why we have to build a people's movement. And the way you build a people's movement is to go to the whole people, not just particular communities, and say, this is happening in your name, do you accept it? And history has shown that people don't accept it. History has shown that people take to the street. So that's where we have to have our hope. If people want to have conversations about changes and bits and pieces like that, that's okay. They can do that. But I, for one, am not particularly interested in reform. And I know some people may find abolition challenging. Well, I think abolition is one stage as part of revolution. So if you find abolition problematic, you're going to find revolution even more problematic. But I'm very much one for revolution.
Great, thank you very much, Ken. Steve, before you put your question, I don't know if you want to respond to Joseph might have been late for the meeting because he was asking something about the history of the police in the Caribbean and out of slavery and so on. Only if you can do that in a nutshell. But of course, he'll have the recording. Yeah.
All I can say to that, Joseph, is that you're absolutely correct. It goes right back to that. Sorry you missed a bit. I'll send you my talk if you like, and so on. But yeah, you know, I mean, the origins in colonialism, in slavery, in all of that is quite there. What I was thinking about is the whole question of individual guilt and institutional guilt, because of course all of the trials depend upon whether an individual policeman did something or didn't do something, rather than the whole situation where they are kind of wound up by the system to be prepared to kill, and they just go and do it. And so, I mean, I'm thinking the one that I recall was Jean-Charles de Menezes, when they had been told that he was a terrorist. Clearly, he wasn't. There aren't many Brazilian Roman Catholics in ISIS, but nevertheless, they've been told that, and so they just killed him. Now, then it's a question of whether they actually obeyed the regulations to the letter or not. When the whole institution is kind of geared up towards it, it seems to me. It's a bit like the question of institutional racism. That doesn't mean that every policeman is a racist, but it means that the whole system is geared towards that. And I think that that's the important thing, and then in the end, they will throw an individual copper to the dogs. If they can get away with keeping the system intact, you know, when in fact very often the individual policeman who've been trained as a killer, the SWAT squads and so on, and then they're told to go in there, they're told what to do, and the whole system, and then it's like, if it goes wrong, they're blamed rather than the whole system.
Can I just quickly respond to that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
sure,
I think the
okay.
culprit, look, out of the 3,000 killings we've had since 1968, there have been only 3 successful prosecutions for murder manslaughter. One was Henry Foley, an Irishman, in 1986. One was Dalian Atkinson, a black footballer. This was about 2 or 3 years ago. And one was Sarah Everard, who was raped and murdered by a police officer. So out of those 3,000, you only have 3 successful prosecutions. The others have escaped justice. So the message to all policewomen, to all police officers is, if you kill, we've got your back. And that culpability is not just individual, it is every single person in that line of command, all the way to prime ministers, because that's the message they're giving to people. Go out on the streets. The colonial policing was about, you know, controlling people, wage labor, and that's what's going on now. Why is it that most of these killings happen on the street at night? It's the same process. There's been no change whatsoever, and the arguments are the same. But I think that's why one of the things we're doing is to go for these prosecutions of not just the police, but the seniors, all the way up to prime ministers. And so next year, and I've put in the chat, I think I'll do it now, I've done it a few times, I've put in a few things for people to look at. One is the link to Migrant Media films. The second thing is the conference report from the People's Tribunal on police killings. And the third thing is something called the Police Prosecution Fund, the PPF, which I like to call the Pig Prosecution Fund. And what that's going to do is that we're going to call for the people of Britain and internationally to support the families in the prosecution of police officers. The funding won't go to barristers, they're all working pro bono. The funding won't go to the legal system, it will go to supporting families. And with that fighting fund, we are going to take on as many of these 3,000 cases. And if you think about 3,000 cases, 3,000 killings, you have to think about the numbers of police officers, senior police officers, investigators, judicial people are involved in that. We're talking about a lot of people in the state who are all culpable, not just the people that use violence, but the people that excuse it, the people that promote violence, and the people that use violence as a way of control.
Great. Thank you there, Ken. We take 2 questions. One for Paul Ward, you're up next, and then Stephen Howard.
Hi, Ken. Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. What you've just said is important, that you don't just campaign on the issue, but you actually get involved in trying to help the victims. In Jamaican for Justice here in Jamaica very much does that too, so I'm very pleased. But my comment I wanted to make was really that your idea, which I agree with, about defunding or abolishing the police, really is only the step towards what's beyond that. Because let's face it, abusive policing is an outcome of an abusive state system, an abusive economic system. So really, you can't stop it just saying abolish the police. We have to be what a lot of us here, of course, are, revolutionary of some sort, to change the neoliberal, capitalist, unequal, abusive society we live in. And it's been said all the time in Jamaica that we still live in a plantation society in Jamaica, and the rest of the world much the same. So it's that bigger challenge. The police not going to change, or the need for such policing won't change unless society changes, or we change society, I should say. We change society.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Stephen, you want to comment yours? And then Ken will respond.
Yes, thanks. Well, first off, I do appreciate the presentation. It's extremely informative. And thanks again, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me. Now, I first got involved with demonstrations against police brutality going back to, I believe, was either 1977 or 78, when Arthur Miller, a Black family man, was shut down unjustifiably and killed by the police department. This is about the time that Reverend Al Sharpton really became into prominence through those demonstrations. Our chant back then was justice for Arthur Miller, freedom for Nelson Mandela. We'd walk from Brooklyn across the Brooklyn Bridge to City Hall. We'd have demonstrations in front of the United Nations. It would be mass rallies. It went through the killing of the grandmother, Eleanor Bumpers, may she rest in peace, who after winning a court case by her landlord called the police. One of those officers showed up. At that time, they used to walk around with shotguns in New York, got on his knee and blew away Eleanor Bumpers, saying that this overweight grandmother approached him with a knife, and his only defense was to blow her away with his shotgun. A lot of people may know about Abner Louima and, you know, being sodomized with a broken mop stick in the precinct with the screams. No police officer went to see what the screams were about. That officer was convicted. I mean, like, you know, there are so many cases that we, especially when I was in New York, were demonstrating against on a weekly basis, and I'm talking about thousands of marches. They changed the system. Systemic racism should also include systemic classism, as you pointed out a while ago when you mentioned class. Here, where I am now in Massachusetts, my city came under the scrutiny of the Department of Justice, whereby now they are being monitored for maybe the past 5 years or so. They are required to hold weekly meetings in different communities, giving reports, police reports on what's been happening. So the police officers are being held more accountable. The then superintendent of police was strongly supporting the department and the activities. She has since resigned prematurely and has been replaced by a Black superintendent. The attitude of the police officers have drastically changed. Those kind of hostile interactions with the police department and the community has subsided because the Department of Justice, I don't know what's going to happen under this new administration, considering what's going on with him. But prior to his election, we saw changes in the police department whereby they became more courteous, professional, and respectful. And if you'd put your, like your email or your contact in the chat, I'll be happy to send you some material, because it will give you a better idea as to how you might be able to, I'm not saying that you're not doing a good job, but nothing is perfect. Everything could use improvement. So I could send along some strategies that has been implemented, not only here in America, in New York, where I used to reside, but here in Massachusetts, on what steps have been taken to bring about change. It's not perfect. It still has a lot of changes to go on. People are still making complaints, but it's nowhere close to what it used to be. Thank you.
Thanks. Ken, you want to respond? Anything there?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. I think I've made it quite clear that I don't believe in reform. And the reason I don't believe in reform is that I'm aware in the UK context, for example, in Birmingham, after the murder of Mikey Powell, the family of Mikey Powell, led by his cousin Tipper Naftali, has had an impact locally on the police and in terms of relations with the police. So this can go on and on and on, and that's fine. But the question is not about making legislation or improvements for the future only. That is a concern of the living. We're concerned with the dead. We are concerned with the people who have been killed before and who have not got justice. And until there is a proper reparation, retribution, and a revolutionary approach to how this issue is dealt with, I think these tweaks in the system are going to go on, but it's not fundamental structural change. So I think there are two pathways that are taken. One pathway which attracts people who believe in improving the system, and that's fine, they can do that. But we're not about that. We're not about reforming the policing system. We're about making people of this country aware that there is actually another world possible, a much better world, which is unimaginable if you're constantly going to rely on the state to protect you, if you're constantly going to be asking what is essentially a fascistic, capitalistic, colonial-minded, imperialist, warmongering group of people, to keep asking them to treat us better, I think is an absolute waste of time. And I know there's a division there in approaches, but we just have to live with it. People can go down one road or go down another.
Yes, thanks, Ken. You know, and I can back that up in a sense that, you know, the work I do with violence against women and girls, you know, some of the research shows that, you know, the incidence of violence against women and girls is higher in the police force than in the population at large. And it really is not surprising, because if you think about it, men who would tend to gravitate towards the police force want to have power over others and control. It's two of the key factors in violence against women. They have to do a lot more in weeding out that sort of people from the force. But then you're looking at the whole society, because, you know, the roots of the problems really is patriarchal society, in which, you know, domination and subjugation are part of the deal. Okay, I think we've run out of questions there. Unless there's another burning one, or if there's any announcements need to be made, we should draw the meeting to a close. I think it's a fantastic meeting with great questions, and I must say great answers as well. We've got the recording, thanks to Steve, but I see a late hand is going up. Okay, Joseph, we'll take you. You want to come in?
Yeah,
Joseph?
I want to.
Okay.
Yeah, are you hearing me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Yeah, I want to make an observation that happened in Grenada. At the advent of the revolution, the then government tried to reform the police. And instead of having a police force, decided to have a police service. Immediately after invasion, in fact, and also there are certain limitations on the police. In terms of like up to a certain rank, policemen were not supposed to carry arms, because prior to the revolution, a number of people were killed by police aggression. But come the invasion, and immediately it was reversed. We had instead returned to the Royal Grenada Police Force instead of the Grenada Police Service. And so I would agree with Ken. The system needs to change. It's tied up with capitalism, it's tied up with patriarchy. We need a new society. I mean, probably wouldn't get it overnight, but this has to be our objective, to change this order, because so many innocent people and have been killed over the years, and also the suffering of the families. We cannot. Those of us who want to feel secure just sit back and well, the police is there to do their job and so on. I learned some lessons from the police. I mean, and it's frightening. I've heard police boasted of doing wicked things because somebody might be a drug addict or something like that. I mean, no compassion. And I'm not saying that these folks are evil people, but the system give them that power. And it's keeping colonialism, slavery, and so on. And we need to get all aspects of that out of the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Steve, your hand is up.
I just want to say that Caribbean Labour Solidarity is working with the Indian Workers Association, the Bengali Workers Council, Jewish Voice for Labour, and various other organisations to organise a Zoom meeting about in support of the campaign for anti-racist immigration and nationality laws. This meeting will take place on the 18th of June. I suddenly realised I haven't put it on the website. That's a grave error. But I'll circulate everyone. If you please come. This is a really important moment in the need to challenge anti-migrant rhetoric, anti-migrant racism, and the way the government's carrying on. We've got two speakers from Caribbean Labour Solidarity, Nadine and Luke, and so on. So please come. I'll circulate everyone with the details. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Steve, a good reminder. Okay, if there are any other announcements people might want to make now before we close the meeting, or any meetings or anything that's happening, Ken?
Just, yeah, very briefly.
Come in, Ken.
Yeah, just very briefly, I've just put now in the chat the link tree for the People's Tribunal on Police Killings. And if people want to copy that over, that has the most up-to-date record of the tribunal, of the police prosecution fund, and of other events that will be holding over the next decade. And I'll just close in case I don't get a chance to say anything to really thank
you'll get a chance.
Okay.
Maybe you could do some closing remarks, Ken. I'll just say that what should I remind people of? That I think we're trying to be as active as we can here in London with the executive and elsewhere, because Paul is in Jamaica, and thanks for your report that you gave as well, and for us to be reminded about Tivoli Gardens, because we were involved with that campaign trying to get justice for the families down there, and maybe something can be revisited again if there's different actors on the scene with it, with looking at that. And certainly, Paul, for you'll tell us about what support you need in Jamaica from us, and we're willing to supply. Of course, part of our actions we do here in the UK is to write letters, picket, and do other activities to bring to the authorities or the government's attention about whatever issues running. So yes, so you'll think about what actions we might need to do, Paul. And Steve, thank you for a very good presentation there too, bringing us up to date with the police and the history. And that was fantastic.
Luke, Glenroy's hands up.
Oh, sorry, Glenroy, your hand is it looks like part of the painting behind you. Sorry. It's okay. We'll get it.
Really say,
okay, let me just say what's the order of play before you go. Glenroy,
sure.
Then Joseph, a quick word then, and then we'll wrap up with Ken making some closing remarks. Okay, coming.
Yeah, just to say, as we do each Sunday, we have a Sunday International starting in about 15 minutes. I've circulated it to most people. And basically, we're discussing whether the trade union movement has defeated the racism that has been historical. So it should be a lively discussion. I'll send out the information. I think I've posted it in the chat. I'll do it again just to log on for anyone who wants to join. Thank you, Chair.
Good, thank you for that, Glenroy. Joseph.
Yeah, by way of information, next Thursday, the 5th of June, would be World Environment Day. And I want people to remember that day and also to do whatever they can in terms of helping to save our environment, notwithstanding the onslaught it is facing at the moment. Please. This year, the theme is
Great.
around plastics, so we need to really be mindful. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph. That's a good reminder that we need to do the environment soon. There's been a lot in the news recently, so that might be something we'll discuss about putting on a meeting on that one. And another notice for people who are in London, on the 4th, we're surrounding Parliament at 11 o'clock, and people are encouraged to wear red, trying to put pressure on the government to end the arming of the Israelis. So if you can make it on Thursday, is it Thursday the 4th? I think that's the date. Let me make sure that Thursday, that's the 4th. Sorry, just a second. I don't want to give you wrong information for this demonstration. May 1, 2, June the 4th. Yes, it's Wednesday the 4th. It's Wednesday the 4th, the surrounding Parliament at 1 o'clock. And then on the 7th, there's an anti-austerity demonstration. It's a national demonstration happening in London. And it starts at 12:30. And I've got loads of flyers. I can tell you exactly where that starts. Let me grab a flyer. Here we go. It's a national demonstration, welfare, not warfare. And it starts at Portland Place, W1B. And it's marching to Whitehall. And that's Sunday, June the 9th from 12 noon. So I hope you can make that one. Okay, if you're in London, of course. Frank Murray, if it's something urgent, come in. Frank, you've got a hand up?
Yeah, Paul.
Okay.
There is a WhatsApp video going around at present, Paul, showing the killing of the civilian by the police. If action starts against with that in Jamaica, could you let us know? Because maybe we should be doing something over here, like going to the embassy, picketing the embassy or something to get, because that was a blatant shooting of a civilian by this policeman.
Sure, that was one of the things I did refer to quickly. Yeah, that was a special case because it was caught on a video.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, I'll follow that up. Thanks, Frank.
Okay, cheers.
Yes, okay. And we'll discuss and try and come up with a date and time so we can do a picket and let people who are in this, if they're in London, we'll inform them, or in the UK. Thanks, Frank. Okay, I think we come into a close there, Ken. So we'll give you the final word to wrap up. And thank you very much again. I think it's been a fantastic meeting.
Thanks, Luke. Obviously, I want to thank you and the rest of the organization, everybody that's attended, for this sharing that we've had. Closing remarks. Somebody very famous once said, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. And I think, that's where we are now internationally. If you look at Palestine, if you look at Congo, if you look at everything else that's happening. And I feel very hopeful and optimistic because of this generation, this current young generation, who are much more politicized and much more vocal than I've seen, to be honest with you, since the late 1960s. So I think we should really, keep our resistance going, keep our hope going. And our children, our grandchildren are on the streets. And let's be there with them. Let's support them and show them that there's a history of resistance and a legacy of revolution that we all share and believe in so much. And thank you once again.
Yeah. Okay, thank you again, Ken, and thanks to everybody for coming to the meeting. There'll be no meeting without you, and so I'll be very pleased that you join us on such a warm, sunny day in England. And look forward to seeing you next month for Sunday in the month. Thank you all very much. Bye.